When Dr. King would come in, we'd get 2,000 or 3,000 people without much effort, so that was in our favor. But when he left, it was more difficult for us to get people to come. So that this phenomena of Doc flying into places where we worked and then flying out to another place, which was needed, made it difficult for us to organize.
Well, in Albany, we were like firefighters. The fire was already burning, and I try to say this as charitably as I can. SNCC was in over its head, and they wanted the international and national attention that Martin Luther King's presence would generate, but they did not want the input of his organization.
I don't have but one speech. I don't have but one message as I journey around this country. And it is a message which says that I am convinced that the most potent weapon available to oppress people as they struggle for freedom and justice is the weapon of
rest, and then we'd have to give in to his demands.
Pritchett made sure his jails wouldn't fill up. He had planned carefully.
I had sat down and took a map and went 15 miles, how many jails was in a 15-mile radius, how many was in a 30-mile radius, on up to maybe a 50-mile radius. And I'd contacted those authorities. They'd assured us that we could use their facilities. And we had, when the mass arrest started, we'd have marches, and there'd be 200, 300. At one time there, I think we had almost 2,000, but none in our jail.
You have to understand that going to jail was probably one of the most feared things in rural Georgia. There were many blacks who were arrested in small towns in Georgia, never to be heard from again. We have every reason to believe many of these were lynched. So going to jail was no small thing.
Dr. Hill, what are the conditions there? How is it crowded?
Yes, very crowded.
How many is that cell supposed to hold?
They don't hold very many because we all sleep on the floor and some of them.
Is that so?
10.
It's built to hold 10, and there are 69 in there. Uh-huh.
Because Chief Pritchett sent prisoners into these jails, some question how nonviolent he really was.
I think the apt description was slick. He did have enough intelligence to read Dr. King's book, and he culled from that a way to avoid the confrontation and inducing the great ferment in the national community by being non-brutal rather than being non-violent. It's bizarre to say that a segregationist system or a law enforcement official of a segregationist system could be nonviolent, because first of all, nonviolence works in a moral climate, and segregation is not a moral climate.
I remember a statement that Chief Pritchett made to me one time when he says, you know, Sherrod, it's just a matter of mind over matter. I don't mind, and you don't matter.
Against the solid resistance of city officials, the Albany movement found strength in mass meetings and song.
most of the mass meeting was singing in Albany. There was more singing than was talking. And so most of the work that was done in terms of taking care of movement business had to do with nurturing the people who had come. And there would be 2 or 3 people who would talk, but basically song was the bed of everything.
July 1962. Dr. King and Reverend Ralph Abernathy began serving a 45-day sentence. They were determined to stay in jail to protest Albany's segregation. But 3 days later, they were released. A stunned Dr. King explained that someone had mysteriously paid their fines.
At which time the chief said to us that we had been released. In other words, that our fine had been paid. I said, well, Chief, we want to serve this time. His only response then was, God knows, Reverend, I don't want you in my jail.
I knew that if he stayed in jail, we'd continue to have problems. So I talked to some people. I said, we've got to get him out. And once we do, I think he'll leave here. And arrangements were made. Frankly, I don't know who the man was that paid the bond.
But it was done at your request?
Yes, it was done at my request. And it sort of surprised Dr. King. This is one time that only time I've ever seen him when he seemed, where he didn't know which way to go.
All right, let's go. Smiling for the birdie, look at it.
In late July, the Albany movement received another setback. At the city's request, federal judge J. Robert Elliott issued a restraining order to end the demonstrations which had been going on for almost 9 months.
When the federal court started ruling against us, that created a whole different thing in terms of what strategy do you use now. Because up to that point, Martin had been willing to break state laws that were unjust laws, and our ally was the federal judiciary. And so if we would take our case to the federal court and the federal court ruled against us, what recourse did we have?
Frustrated by the federal court action, Dr. King called for President Kennedy to intervene, but Kennedy remained distant.
The president had decided that he was going to delegate the civil rights matter to the Attorney General, and that was going to be a primary area of responsibility for the Attorney General. And the president was going to spend his time dealing with other parts of it, the administration policy, and especially, of course, foreign affairs.
The United States government is involved in sitting down at Geneva with the Soviet Union. I can't understand why the government of Albany, the City Council of Albany, cannot do the same for American citizens.
By August, Dr. King realized there would be no clear-cut victories in Albany. He was depressed as he left the city. Albany remained as segregated as it was the previous December when he first arrived.
I'm under orders to keep walking.
The Albany movement continued without him.
Don't get weary. Endure to the end. What does the Bible say about it? Victory is not to the swift or to the strong, but to him who holds out to the end. We got to hold out.
Now, I can't help how Dr. King might have felt, or Wyatt T. might have felt, or Bernard Lee, or any of the rest of them in SLC, NAACP, CORE, any other groups were felt. But as far as we were concerned, things moved on. We didn't skip one beat.
The ministers of SCLC left Albany, but they took with them some important lessons.